The village breathed with a life that could not be seen, only felt. At dawn, when the sun stretched its golden fingers across the elders would sit beneath the old baobab tree and speak in low voices. "Remember," one of them would often say, "the ground you walk on is not empty. It listens." And the children would nod, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight of those words settle in their hearts. In this place, the living and the ancestors shared the same path. The wind carried whispers, and the land held memory like a mother holds her child. Every farm, every path, every doorway had a story. When a man planted crops, he would bow his head slightly and murmur thanks. When a woman fetched water, she moved with care, knowing the river had a spirit that watched. Nothing was done without thought, because to forget the old ways was to invite misfortune. The people believed that blessings came from respect, and curses followed pride. At the center of this village stood a great compound, tall and wide, its walls strong like the pride of a king. The gates were carved with patterns that spoke of history, and the land around it stretched far, rich and fertile. Goats grazed calmly, and workers moved through the fields with steady hands. To the eyes of strangers, it was a place of wealth. But to those who knew, it was more than that. It was a place where the past still lived. An old woman once paused near its entrance and whispered, "This house, it remembers more than it shows." Another replied softly, "And not all who live inside it understand what it holds." Then they walked on, leaving their words behind like seeds waiting to grow. Within those walls lived a woman whose silence carried more meaning than loud voices ever could. She moved gently, her steps slow, her hands often resting on her swollen belly. Life was growing inside her, yet she carried herself as if she bore more than just a child. Her face was calm, her eyes deep, like a river that hid its strength beneath a quiet surface. Some women in the village would shake their heads when they saw her. "Why does she say nothing?" one would ask. "If it were me, I would not stay quiet like that." But another, older and wiser, would respond, "Child, do not mistake quietness for weakness. The strongest trees bend in the wind." The woman had learned this long ago. Her mother had once held her hand and said, "There is a time to speak, and there is a time to wait. Wisdom knows the difference." And so she waited, even as her world began to shift around her. Her husband, once a man of humble beginnings, had changed with the rise of his fortune. Wealth had come to him like fast rain, sudden and overwhelming. The large compound, the wide lands, the respect of the people, it all fed something inside him. But instead of gratitude, it grew pride. He began to walk differently, speak differently. His voice became louder, his laughter sharper. "Look around you," he would say to anyone who listened. "All of this is mine. I built it with my own strength." His words carried confidence, but also blindness. For the roots of the tree he stood under were not planted by his hands. The elders noticed. One of them sighed quietly and said, "When a man forgets where he came from, the ground beneath him begins to shift." But the husband did not hear them, or perhaps he chose not to listen. Then one day, the air in the compound changed. She arrived without hesitation, her presence bold and unafraid. Her clothes were bright, her posture straight, her eyes sharp with confidence. She looked around the compound as if she were already measuring her place within it. When she spoke, her voice carried no softness. "So this is where you live," she said, her lips curving slightly. "It is worthy." The husband smiled, pleased. "Not just worthy. It is power." She let out a small laugh. "Then power suits me well." From that moment, her presence grew like fire in dry grass. She moved through the compound without respect for its silence, touching what she pleased, speaking as she wished. The traditions of the village meant nothing to her. "Old ways are for those who fear change," she said once, waving her hand dismissively. "In this world, you take what you deserve." The quiet wife watched all this without a word. Her eyes followed, her hands remained still. She did not question, did not protest. But inside her silence, something was building, not anger, not fear, but something deeper. There were signs, small but clear, that not everything was as it seemed. One afternoon, a traveler stopped at the gate and looked at the quiet woman with sudden recognition. His posture changed at once, his head bowing slightly. "I did not know," he began, but before he could finish, he was turned away. Another day, an old man stood at the edge of the land, his gaze fixed on the soil. "This knows its true blood," he murmured. "It does not forget." The woman heard him, but she said nothing. Her silence was no longer just patience. It was knowing. And as the days passed, the compound stood as it always had, strong, proud, and full of life. But beneath its surface, a truth waited quietly, like thunder hiding behind clear skies, preparing for the moment it would finally be heard. The sun had barely touched the horizon when the truth, heavy and quiet, rested beneath the surface of the compound. Though the husband strode proudly through the halls, counting the wealth as his own, the walls whispered secrets. The land, the house, the riches, all belonged to the woman whose hands now rested on her swollen belly. Her father's spirit lingered in the corners, reminding the earth and the air of what was rightfully hers. He had built nothing. He merely occupied a place that was lent by blood and legacy, yet he knew nothing of the power hidden beneath her silence. One afternoon, the husband entered, beaming with pride. "Look, my love," he said to the stranger beside him, "this is the life we command now. You will see the order of this house soon enough." The mistress laughed lightly, her confidence cutting through the air like a sharp wind. "I like the sound of that," she replied, her gaze sweeping the compound as though it had been waiting for her all along. She walked through the halls with an air of ownership, touching the curtains, brushing against the polished doors, as if claiming each corner. The wife watched from the shadowed archway, her face calm, her lips pressed together. She said nothing, yet every step the mistress took was recorded in her memory, every slight measured and noted. As days turned to weeks, the balance of the house shifted in plain sight. The husband ordered his wife to prepare meals for guests who had come unannounced, to scrub floors that were once swept by her servants, and to serve the mistress with a polite smile. "Do not let your pride get in the way of duty," he barked one morning, his voice harsh against her soft frame. The wife bowed, her back straight despite the swelling in her belly. She worked beneath the burning sun, her hands blistered, her knees aching, yet her eyes never showed anger. They reflected patience, endurance, and the silent calculation of a woman who understood that storms often began quietly. Outside the compound, the village whispered behind closed doors. Mothers watched as the pregnant woman moved from task to task, offering help to those who came for food or counsel, while fathers frowned at the audacity of the husband bringing such a mistress into the home. "This is not the way of our people," one elder murmured to another. "But how do we speak when pride walks with its own shield?" Fear tempered their words, respect held them silent, and yet their eyes followed the events with careful judgment. Even the children noticed, wide-eyed and whispering about the quiet woman who moved as if carrying not only a child, but the weight of justice itself. At night, when the compound settled into uneasy quiet, the wife sat by the small hearth in the corner, cradling her belly. Her breaths were steady, her mind clear. The pain of labor yet to come, the exhaustion from endless tasks, and the sting of humiliation mingled in her body, yet her spirit remained unbroken. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "All things hidden will one day be seen. Patience is the mother of revelation." Outside, the wind carried the sounds of the village, the quiet sighs of those who watched, the whispered warnings of the elders, and the gentle rustle of the trees that knew all truths. Among the elders, there were hushed conversations that carried the weight of prophecy. "A storm is coming," one said, shaking his head. "The quiet will not stay silent forever." Another nodded, adding, "Injustice, even the boldest, never escapes the eyes of fate." Their words floated on the night air, passing through cracks in doors and around the corners of the compound, settling into hearts like seeds waiting for the rain. Within those walls, the pregnant wife remained, a figure of silent suffering yet unyielding strength, holding the past, the present, and the future within her calm gaze. And so the house, rich with wealth but poor in true ownership, waited. The mistress laughed, the husband commanded, and the community watched. But beneath it all, patience lived, strong as iron, patient as the river that shaped the land, waiting for the moment when justice, long hidden, would rise and reveal the truth that no pride or arrogance could ever conceal. The mistress arrived one morning with the sun still low, her heels clicking against the polished stone floors of the compound. She walked through the halls as though the walls themselves had bent to her will, her eyes scanning every corner with the confidence of someone who claimed what was never hers. "This is how a house should be managed," she said loudly to the servants who froze in their tracks. She directed the cooking, arranged the furniture, and even told the gardener which paths to trim first, her voice carrying like a drumbeat through the open courtyard. The pregnant wife moved quietly behind her, silent but watching, her hands folded over the growing curve of her belly, every gesture measured and calm. One afternoon, the mistress slipped into the wife's private room, brushing her fingers over the embroidered curtains. She opened drawers, pulled out dresses, and draped them over her shoulders as though trying them on for a throne. "Ah, how comfortable it feels to be the lady of this place," she murmured, spinning in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. The wife entered silently, her eyes meeting the mistress's for just a heartbeat. She said nothing. Yet her stillness was sharper than a knife, a quiet warning that power taken without respect could never truly belong. Feasts became a stage for pride and mockery. The mistress invited neighbors, flaunting wealth and control, commanding the servants and even the pregnant wife to cater and serve. Plates were arranged with care, only for the mistress to drop words of derision, praising herself while the wife moved between tables, unseen and unnoticed by the guests. "Do you see how much easier life can be when one knows how to rule?" the mistress said with a laugh, tilting her head at the wife, who remained bowed, her expression serene but unbroken. Each feast became a lesson in humility, though the mistress did not yet understand for whom it would apply. Mockery cut sharper than any spear. "Why do you stand there like a shadow, silent and useless?" the mistress jeered one afternoon, tossing a towel at the wife's feet. "Do you even know how to live in your own house?" The wife's lips pressed together, her fingers steady as she picked up the towel, returning to her chores. She did not raise her voice, for the ancestors had taught her that silence was a shield and patience a weapon stronger than any insult. The husband's heart, once warm with pride in his wife, had hardened like stone. He watched the mistress take control, nodding at her every command, offering no comfort to the woman who bore his child. "Do as she says," he told the wife, his tone sharp, as though demanding obedience could erase his conscience. Compassion had been traded for the illusion of power, and the compound, once full of laughter, echoed only with the mistress's sharp voice and the wife's quiet footsteps. Commands came without mercy, each order heavier than the last. She was to sweep floors under the midday sun, prepare food for feasts, and serve the mistress with a smile, her swollen belly ignored, her pain dismissed. "Move faster," the husband barked one morning, as if life itself could bend to his will. The wife obeyed, bending beneath the weight of both labor and humiliation, yet her mind remained steady, her resolve like iron forged in silence. Even gratitude became a chain. Whenever she performed a task, the husband demanded thanks, twisting kindness into proof of her subservience. "You should be grateful you still live under this roof," he said, the words dripping with arrogance. The wife, though weary, offered only calm obedience, her spirit quietly noting every injustice, storing strength for a reckoning that would not be denied. The compound, rich with gold and status but poor in respect, became a battlefield of patience, silence, and hidden power, where one woman endured all, waiting for the moment when truth would rise like the sun and illuminate every corner. The sun bore down on the compound, its heat pressing against every wall and casting long shadows over the dusty paths. The pregnant wife moved slowly through the courtyard, her hands steady as she carried water, stirred pots, and swept the floor, though each step sent a sharp ache through her back. Beads of sweat traced lines across her brow, and yet she said nothing. Every movement was deliberate, her silence heavy with endurance, a quiet rebellion shaped by the lessons of her mother and grandmother, that true strength often lies in patience, not in outward struggle. The villagers watched from a distance, their eyes full of unease. "See how she bears it all," whispered an older woman, wringing her hands. "It is not weakness that keeps her still. It is power hidden beneath silence." The wife's calm was like the deep river, serene on the surface but carrying untold currents beneath. Her husband remained blind to it, ordering tasks with impatience and derision, believing obedience equaled submission. Elders, seated under the shade of the ancient Irako tree, began to murmur among themselves. "The balance of this household is broken," said one, his voice low but grave. "Harm to a mother who carries life disrupts the spirits. Ancestral eyes do not turn away from injustice." Another added, "Such cruelty invites misfortune. The land itself will turn its favor from those who dishonor the sacred." Their words traveled like wind through the village, though the husband dismissed them with a laugh. "Superstition has no place where gold rules," he said, chest puffed with pride, unwilling to see beyond the wealth that fed his ego. The women of the community observed quietly, their hands full with chores, their hearts heavy. They wished to speak, to rise against the injustice, but fear kept their tongues silent. Still, they found ways to aid the suffering wife. Beneath the cover of night, small bundles of food appeared at the doorstep, whispered prayers drifted into the walls of the compound, and tiny gestures reminded her she was not alone. These acts, though hidden, became the threads holding her spirit together, weaving resilience where oppression sought to break it. The wife endured, her body aching, her voice unheard, yet her presence radiated dignity. Even the youngest children of the village paused to watch her pass, sensing that she carried more than just a child within her womb. She carried patience, wisdom, and a quiet authority that no insult could diminish. By her silence, she became a living symbol, teaching all who saw her that courage need not shout to be recognized, and that true power often grows unseen, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The wind carried whispers through the village that day, voices older than memory speaking of imbalance and pride. Within the compound, the pregnant wife moved among the chores, her hands steady, her heart quiet, yet her eyes caught every detail. The elders' warnings echoed like distant drums. He who forgets the roots invites ruin upon himself. Her husband's laughter rang hollow against these words, his mind consumed by modern success, blind to the traditions that had nourished the land and the people for generations. The mistress strutted through the halls as if born to command, mocking the old ways, blind to the silent currents of power she could not see. Outside the gates, visitors approached and bowed low, as if sensing a force beyond the loud displays of wealth and arrogance. A trader, known across neighboring towns, offered a polite nod to the wife, whispering to his companion, "She carries the weight of a house far older than this man's gold." The mistress noticed this, her eyes narrowing. "Who do you speak to?" she snapped. The wife said nothing, her silence heavy with meaning. Even the simplest gestures, the way her hand rested on the railing, the way she carried herself, spoke of authority unclaimed, waiting. Later, an old family ally arrived, hoping to deliver a message that might have reminded the husband of the lineage he had forgotten. But the mistress intercepted him at the doorway, blocking the path with a smirk. "This is not for you," she said, dismissing him like a shadow. The ally hesitated, sensing a deeper wrong, before retreating with a troubled heart. Within the walls, ledgers, sealed documents, and family symbols lay unnoticed, hiding the truth like a lion resting under the sun, powerful, patient, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The wife paused in her work, her mind weaving threads of strategy from the quiet lessons of her ancestors. Her endurance shifted from mere survival to deliberate preparation. Each movement, each nod, each polite word was measured, a part of a growing plan she had shaped in silence. She whispered to herself in the tongue of her lineage, "The storm comes for those who forget respect. Patience is my shield, and timing is my sword." By nightfall, her calm was no longer just acceptance. It was a sharpened edge, a weapon invisible yet unstoppable, forged by years of quiet strength and guided by the wisdom of the ancestors who watched from the shadows. The mistress moved through the compound with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, her every step claiming dominion over what was not hers. She laughed loudly, tossing orders at the servants and the pregnant wife alike, as though the walls themselves had granted her authority. "Why do you linger, woman?" she snapped, seeing the wife pause with a basket of fruit. "Move, or the guests will see your uselessness." The wife lowered her head, her hands trembling, but she said nothing. Her silence carried more weight than words. It was patience carved from generations of resilience. That evening, a gathering was held in the courtyard, the sun still casting long shadows across the polished floors. Neighbors and distant relatives filled the space, unaware of the brewing storm beneath polite greetings. The wife was summoned to serve, carrying plates heavy with roasted meat and bowls of fragrant rice, her back aching with every careful step. She moved as quietly as a whisper in the wind, careful not to stumble, while the mistress circled behind her, smirking and giving silent directions. "Faster! Show them your place," she hissed. Laughter rang out among some of the guests, bright and careless, as they watched the scene unfold. Others shifted uncomfortably, glances exchanged, murmurs of disapproval trailing in the wind. "It is not right," whispered one elder, hand resting on a carved staff, eyes narrowed. But the husband, flushed with pride and blind ambition, stood proudly at the head of the courtyard, a smile twisting his features. "She is no longer mine to command," he announced, voice loud enough to silence the murmurs. "I will take another, one who deserves my name." Gasps spread through the gathering, and the weight of betrayal sank into the hearts of those who valued honor. The pregnant wife's breath came in shallow bursts, her body threatening to collapse under the strain, yet her gaze remained steady. She remembered the stories her grandmother told, how the earth punished arrogance, how patience was a weapon sharper than any spear. She clenched her hands around the plates, refusing to let despair consume her, each step a testament to a spirit that refused to bow. Her silence became deliberate, a shield against hasty words, a seed of justice sown quietly in the fertile soil of endurance. Outside the compound, whispers traveled quickly. Villagers speculated in hushed tones, the tension palpable. "Something stirs," said one, eyes scanning the horizon. "The winds carry change, the storm is near." Even the trees seemed to lean closer, as though the ancestral spirits themselves were gathering to witness what would come. The courtyard, once filled with laughter and pride, now hummed with anticipation, as if the air itself knew that the balance of power was on the brink of shifting, and that the quiet woman's time, long awaited, was drawing close. The village awoke to the low, rolling thrum of drums echoing across the fertile fields, a sound that carried through the morning mist and into every heart. Children paused mid-play, women set down their baskets, and men leaning against carved doorframes straightened in attention. The drumbeat was not merely music, it was a summons, calling the entire community to witness a truth long hidden. Messengers ran swiftly, breath misting in the dawn air, announcing that all must gather at the compound, for justice would unfold beneath the eyes of ancestors whose whispers had long guided the village. As the courtyard filled, the elders arrived in solemn procession. Their robes were muted yet regal, embroidered with symbols that spoke of wisdom, lineage, and the weight of generations. Each step carried the authority of the past, and every gaze seemed to pierce the illusions built by pride. The villagers fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. These were the guardians of tradition, the voices through which the ancestors still judged right from wrong, and they sat in their designated places, faces carved with the calm but unyielding lines of experience. Strangers entered behind them, bearing fine cloth and leather cases, the subtle scent of ink and paper mingling with the earthy fragrance of the compound. These visitors were unknown to many, yet their presence spoke of a larger world beyond the village. With careful hands, they opened bundles to reveal documents, testaments, records, and decrees that would challenge everything the household believed to be theirs. Eyes widened, murmurs rose like the rustling of dry leaves, but the elders raised hands to still the crowd, signaling that the time for revelation had come. A voice, steady and deliberate, broke the hush. "By the laws of inheritance, and by the testament of the late patriarch, this land, this house, and the wealth contained within belong to her," it declared, nodding toward the wife. Shock rippled through the compound, the words sinking into every corner, shaking the pride that had been carefully built. The mistress paled, her poised confidence faltering, while the husband's face hardened at first, then slackened as disbelief gave way to shame. Murmurs became a collective gasp. The earth seemed to tremble beneath feet that had once stomped with arrogance. The illusion of authority crumbled as quickly as it had been erected. What had been thought permanent, the kingdom of borrowed power, now lay exposed as a fragile construct. The husband, once towering with pride, now slumped, his chest heaving with a mixture of humiliation and stunned comprehension. The community watched, some with quiet satisfaction, others with disbelief, as the proud man realized that his dominion had never truly belonged to him. Around him, the elders' calm faces conveyed the finality of truth. Balance was returning, and justice, long delayed, was now unmistakable. The mistress stood frozen, her eyes wide, hands trembling as the final words settled over the compound like a heavy rain. The power she had worn like a crown, bold, loud, and commanding, crumbled into silence. Every step she had taken, every command she had given, was now exposed as hollow. Her confidence, once a roaring flame, flickered weakly, then fell into dust beneath the weight of truth. She looked around, searching for allies in the crowd, only to meet the steady, unblinking gazes of villagers who had long awaited this moment. Whispers passed through the gathered crowd, soft as the wind through the palms, carrying awe and quiet satisfaction. Children peeked from behind elders' robes, sensing the shift without fully understanding its magnitude. Men and women exchanged looks, some nodding subtly, others folding hands in reverent acknowledgement. Justice had breathed again, and the village, guided by the eyes of ancestors, witnessed the natural order restored. The air seemed lighter, yet charged, as if every stone and tree in the compound held a memory of the balance that had been denied. From the shadows, the wife stepped forward. The sunlight caught her profile, illuminating a calm that drew every gaze. No anger colored her movements, yet her presence demanded attention as if the land itself recognized her as its rightful steward. She lifted her chin, shoulders straight, her steps measured but confident, echoing the rhythm of generations that had nurtured her patience. "Enough," she said, her voice soft, carrying through the murmurs, yet slicing through the storm of shame and fear. "The truth has been seen, and the rightful place of all is now clear." Her calm authority rippled through the compound. Silence was no longer absence but a shield and a weapon, a carefully held power that had waited for its time. The villagers understood, at last, that the quiet woman had never been weak. Her patience had been deliberate, her endurance a measure of strength passed down by ancestors who had taught that the river carves the stone only through time, not force. The crowd felt the weight of wisdom in her words, a power that demanded neither violence nor intimidation. The throne, once held by illusion and arrogance, now awaited her touch. Slowly, deliberately, she moved to reclaim it, not with a shout or a show of might, but with the dignity of one who knows her roots and her worth. The husband sank back into his seat, eyes wide with disbelief, realizing the emptiness of his authority. The mistress turned away, her every step a quiet surrender to the truth she had failed to see. Power had shifted without a single hand raised in anger, and yet its force was undeniable. The villagers bowed their heads slightly, some murmuring blessings, others simply witnessing. The household had found its balance again, the rightful keeper restored, and the lesson was clear. Pride built on deception crumbles, while patience, wisdom, and silence, when guided by truth, command respect and honor that no arrogance can ever touch. The elders rose, their white hair catching the sunlight as their voices carried across the compound, steady and unwavering. "No wealth, no pride, no crown of gold can undo what the ancestors have ordained," intoned the oldest among them, his eyes sweeping over the gathered villagers. Every word fell like a hammer on stone, reminding all that dignity, respect, and tradition stood above the fleeting illusions of power. The crowd listened in hushed reverence, understanding that even the strongest man could not escape the judgment of those who carried the wisdom of generations. The villagers exchanged solemn glances, feeling the weight of the lesson sink into their hearts. Stories of arrogance and betrayal would now be told beside fires and under moonlit skies, etched into memory for generations. Mothers would recount it to children, and fathers would speak of it to sons and daughters, teaching that no man's pride could ever eclipse the laws of the land or the watchful eyes of the ancestors. It was a reminder carved deep into the soul of the village, a truth that would not fade. The husband, once towering in authority, now walked slowly among those he had tried to command. His head bowed, shoulders heavy, every step echoing the burden of shame. He saw the faces of neighbors, friends, and family, all witnesses to his failures, and felt the cold sting of humility. The riches he had clutched so tightly now meant nothing, and the respect he had demanded had dissolved, leaving only the stark shadow of disgrace. He could speak, but no words could repair the loss of honor he now carried like chains upon his chest. The mistress moved quietly, head lowered, leaving the compound with her pride shattered and her voice swallowed by silence. She passed through the gates without protest, without glances of defiance, knowing her illusion of power had crumbled. The villagers watched her disappear into the dust of the road, the lessons of her arrogance joining the stories that the elders would tell, a warning to anyone tempted by fleeting wealth or hollow authority. The wife remained seated for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the calm strength that had carried her through months of suffering. She did not rush, for her wisdom had been tested and proven. Anger did not rise in her heart, for she knew that true power lay not in revenge but in measured judgment. "Let the land, the people, and the ancestors guide the path," she murmured, feeling the weight of tradition and her own patience. Her choice was deliberate. Mercy could be granted, but with boundaries that preserved her dignity. Otherwise, she could reclaim independence and send the man away, allowing him to learn the consequences of his pride. Slowly, she stood, and the compound seemed to breathe with her presence. The spaces that had once echoed with arrogance and cruelty now shimmered with quiet order. Each courtyard, each doorway, each fertile field returned to the natural balance of respect and truth. The villagers, watching from beyond the walls, felt a renewed faith in the power of the ancestors and the justice they inspired. Harmony had returned, not through violence, but through patience, wisdom, and the enduring strength of a woman who knew that silence, endurance, and careful judgment were the truest forms of power. The night was soft, and the moon hung low over the compound, casting silver light on the thatched roofs as the wife labored with quiet determination. The cries of birth mingled with the rustle of leaves, and the air seemed to hum with the presence of the ancestors, their unseen hands guiding and blessing this moment. With the final push, a child entered the world, healthy and strong, and the elders whispered among themselves, smiling through the shadows. "The line continues," murmured the oldest. "The ancestors rejoice once more." The village felt a stirring of hope, as if the very earth had sighed with relief. The child, wrapped in soft cloth, became an emblem of the family's honor and resilience. Eyes glistened as the mother held the newborn close, her strength now mirrored in the tiny heartbeat she cradled. "See how the future carries our roots," an aunt said, touching the child's brow lightly. "What was nearly lost now rises again." The infant's presence reminded all that legacy was more than land, more than wealth. It was spirit, lineage, and the enduring power of life itself. In the quiet that followed, the elders spoke softly, their words carrying the weight of tradition. "Silence is not weakness," one said, "but power waiting for its time." Another added, "Pride and betrayal always walk toward their own fall." The villagers nodded, understanding the lesson. Loud resistance may shake the air, but true strength grows quietly, rooted in heritage and integrity. The child's birth was a living testament to this truth, a reminder that resilience and patience held a power that arrogance could never claim. The mother rose, standing in the courtyard where she had once knelt in despair. Her back was straight, her gaze steady, and the warmth of justice glowed in her eyes. Around her, the land seemed to breathe freely, no longer burdened by deceit or oppression. The winds carried whispers of balance restored, of a household returned to its rightful order. She was unshaken, a living symbol that patience and righteousness endure, and that the ancestors' blessings, once denied, now flowed freely through the child, the family, and the land itself.